International compliment. Witnesses are not confined to America. Millions in the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, Australia, South America, Mexico, and nations around the world have seen UFOs. Jacques Vallée has in his file cases of close encounters from every country on Earth, many of them involving UFO occupants of various sizes and shapes. Astronaut Gordon Cooper claims that he saw hundreds of UFOs in Europe and chased them in his plane for hours. According to Dr. Olavo T. Fontes, professor of medicine at the Brazil National School of Medicine, there is no UFO controversy in Brazil. Such vast numbers have seen UFOs at close range that they need no convincing. Dr. Fontes personally investigated more than 300 of these cases. Robert Gallery, Minister of Defense for the French government, said on the radio, "If your listeners could see for themselves the mass of reports concerning landing UFOs with occupants coming in from the airborne gendarmerie, they would see that it is all pretty disturbing. In fact, the number of these gendarmerie reports is very great, and Jacques Vallée lists 923 documented cases of UFOs landing in France between 1868 and 1968. Other accounts of UFO sightings have been reported from Russia, and Soviet Deputy Premier Kozlov is one of the men there who is convinced of their existence. According to Brad Steiger and Joan Wrightrow in their book Flying Saucers Are Hostile, in the spring of 1959, UFOs brought more panic to Soviet radar and Air Force personnel by hovering and circling for more than 24 hours above Sverdlovsk, headquarters of a tactical mission command. The Red fighter pilot sent aloft to chase the UFOs away reported that the alien objects easily outmaneuvered their jets and zigzagged to avoid their machine gun fire. Dozens of nervous candidates for Soviet civilian flying license have complained about UFOs sweeping at them and even following their planes back to the airfields. There have been so many sightings in the Soviet Union that they too have launched an official UFO study project under the leadership of Major General Porfiry A. Stolarov. When the two Russian cosmonauts, Yuri Romanenko and Grigoriy Krechky, returned to Earth in March 1978 after 96 days in orbit aboard their Salyut-6 orbiting spacecraft, they told of a formation of UFOs which trailed them closely for 3 complete orbits around the globe. One of the astronauts' cameras filmed the 20-minute fantastic motion picture footage of this encounter. A second camera took still shots, securing some outstanding pictures. This news, of course, was suppressed in the Soviet Union, but they did, according to a previous mutual agreement, forward copies to the United States to be analyzed by NASA. Unofficial statements from NASA state that it is the best motion picture footage ever filmed of UFOs, and some of the still photographs have been enlarged to 4 feet square, revealing many features of UFOs. A report leaking out of Russia states that the whole episode marks irrefutable proof of their UFOs' existence and of their extremely high maneuverability in space. Paul Vorohaev, a Russian not living in the United States, says that Russian peasants interpret the saucers as awesome warnings from God and as a sign of the end of the world. Dates and data. UFO sightings cover a vast period of time. For thousands of years, there have been reports of strange sightings, and records of such sightings have been found in a number of ancient manuscripts. One of the earliest, undoubtedly, was found in Egypt, dated about 1500 BC. It referred to a great circle of fire coming in the sky, and followed by other similar circles. These vehicles had no head and no tail, but they did have a mouth with no voice, a good description as any of the spherical craft. The modern furor concerning spacecrafts seems to have begun in 1947. It was in that year that Kenneth Arnold was flying in his private plane from Chehalis to Yakima, Washington, when he sighted 9 gleaming discs near the Cascade Mountains. The 9 were strung one behind the other, traveling at fantastic speeds. Their estimated size about 100 feet in diameter and saucer-like in shape. The name caught on, and soon flying saucers became a household term in America. Arnold's name found its way into our history books. Soon, reports of other sightings began coming in from different parts of the country confirming his experience. Such sightings, however, have been recorded much earlier than 1947. As far back as 1896 to 1897, there were records of UFOs appearing over San Francisco and Chicago. More than 150 sightings were reported during that time. The records refer to space vehicles as bizarre, lighter-than-air ships, sporting propellers, porthole windows, antennae, and brilliant searchlights which they directed at the ground. On May 15, 1879, a strange entry was made in the log of the HMS Vulture when cruising in the Persian Gulf. Commander Pringle recorded that two incredible objects, glowing brightly, were pacing his ship, one on each side. He described them as revolving wheels with illuminated spokes. Long before then, American Indian mythology, we now say Native American, Native American mythology had described space vehicles in its own characteristic fashion. The Sioux Indians referred to sky people returning to their home on high by turning themselves into arrows and ascending in that form. Some men have used this description as proof of extraterrestrial visitors being able to adapt themselves to the cultural milieu of the time. For thousands of years, there have been reports of sightings of strange vehicles in the sky, and these records have been preserved in ancient manuscripts. One author, Ed Vallow, on tape message says, "Every generation in history, except one, has a recorded reference to a UFO. The one exception being the generation when Christ walked on this earth, AD 0 to 30. This is a highly significant fact in view of the thesis we are proposing. It seems too easy to dismiss all these reports as mere legends. Persistent legend, duplicated in different countries and cultures, would seem to indicate a basis of fact. Serious space writers are today giving much attention to these reports and are finding certain similarities between primitive and present-day descriptions of UFO sightings. The proliferation of investigative organizations, both official and private, also would indicate a basis of fact to UFO reports. Whereas the government of many countries has set up organizations to study these sightings, far more numerous are the private organizations established for the same purpose. Typical of these organizations would be the Ground Saucer Watch of Phoenix, Arizona, and the Project Starlight International of Austin, Texas. 100 such organizations exist in America alone. Such is the interest in the subject that a new science has come into being called exobiology. Its function is to search the universe for extraterrestrial life. Its leading spokesman is the noted Carl Sagan of Cornell University. His books, The Cosmic Connection and The Dragons of Eden, have become bestsellers. Sagan is convinced that civilizations exist in the reaches of space. He produced a remarkable album record of Earth sounds that was fastened to the spaceship Voyager for its trip into space, far beyond our solar system. In the recording, Sagan included greetings in 60 languages, including sounds from volcanoes, avalanches, surf, and animals. There is even the sounds of whales saying, "Hi there." More dates and data. The existence of photographs and certain physical records are further proof that UFOs exist. Rex Heflin took photographs of a UFO in Orange County, California in 1965 when he was a highway traffic investigator for the county road department. He saw this vehicle skim over telephone poles, cross the road in front of him, and continue in flight on a low level. The sighting lasted about 15 seconds, during which time he took 4 Polaroid photographs. These photographs were later published by the Santa Ana Register and released to other papers by United Press International. No less an expert than Arthur Lundau, former director of Photographic Interpretation Center of the CIA, has issued a statement that he had examined a number of UFO films on behalf of the U.S. government and found them to be authentic. Astronaut John McDivitt took movies of a UFO as he orbited the Earth in 1965 at a speed of 17,000 miles per hour. This strange space vehicle, disc-like in shape, circled their craft as he and astronaut White were on their 20th revolution. He has no doubt whatever as to the craft he saw and filmed. In addition to this, photographs exist of physical marks left on the ground by space vehicles. Sometimes these marks are scorched earth, sometimes tripod impressions. Physicist James McKimball, addressing a UFO symposium in 1975, said, "Evidence left at landing sites leaves little room that UFOs are heavy, ponderous objects when addressed, yet in flight their startling departures, sudden stops, and right-angle turns at high speed require them to be virtually massless. With such evidence, one is entitled to ask, how much more is needed before everyone believes in the reality of this phenomena? One can understand men like Edward J. Ruppelt, head of Project Blue Book, being perplexed by the unwillingness of men to accept this evidence. He asks, what constitutes proof? Does a UFO have to land at the river entrance to the Pentagon, near the Joint Chief of Staff offices? Or is it proof when a ground radar station detects a UFO, sends a jet to intercept it, the jet pilot sees it, and locks on with his radar? Is it proof when a jet pilot fires at a UFO and sticks to his story even under the threat of court-martial? Confronted with the mass of evidence that UFOs really exist, the question that inevitably follows is, how is one to explain it all? Millions of people identify with the conclusion of Carl G. Jung, the famed founder of the modern psychiatry. By all human standards, it hardly seems possible to doubt UFO existence any longer. Close encounters. The science of UFOlogy specifies three distinct categories of sightings. Close encounters of the first kind. This refers to mere sightings of an unidentified flying object at close quarters. Number 2, close encounters of the second kind. This includes not only the sighting of a UFO at close quarters, but also the presence of certain physical records of the craft having been there. These records may be tangible marks on the ground, the scorching of grass, interference with electric circuits, or physical effects on animals or humans like temporary paralysis and weightlessness. Number 3, close encounters of the third kind. This is the most bizarre and incredible of the three encounters, for it includes, in addition to the two distinctives above, a direct confrontation with a space being or entity sometimes called a humanoid. These sightings are so incredible that scientists of the caliber of Dr. Hynek would gladly omit them altogether if they could do so without offense to scientific intelligence. There is a tendency on the part of all intelligent beings not to accept evidence of such mind-boggling nature. It means that one has to go out on a limb if he is to subscribe to a belief that animated, living creatures have been descending from strange space vehicles, gesturing to humans, and even trying to engage them in conversation. People have become so accustomed to viewing such encounters as jokes that it is well nigh impossible to treat them as facts. After all, who wants to go on record as one that has actually seen a giant humanoid and had communications with him? Or of having seen little green men peeping through your kitchen window? It is like believing in leprechauns. Such things may be all right for crackpots, but not for men of intelligence. No wonder Amy Michelle referred to this type of UFO phenomena as a festival of absurdity. But in spite of such reaction, close encounters of the third kind does have one thing in their favor. One may be excused to mistaking or misidentifying an object at a distance, but to do so when it is within a few yards of the observer is most unlikely, and this is often the case with close encounters of the third kind. Sterno, Italy, 1977. One of the most recent reports of one of these encounters comes from the little town of Sterno near Naples, Italy. On August 29, 1977, no fewer than 7 men from Sterno saw a spaceship parked on the ground, and also a giant space-suited humanoid trying to communicate with them. The men were awestruck and spellbound as this creature gestured to them. 2 of the 7 witnesses were put into trances and questioned by the medical hypnotist. According to the report of Professor Franco Granoni of the University of Turin, they are not telling lies. The subjects under hypnosis have referred to facts they actually lived through. The space giant was first spotted by 2 college students, Michele Giovanilio and Rocco Cerello just after midnight. Here is a part of a newspaper report, February 21st, 1978. February 21st is my birthday. That's weird. According to Giovanello, we were out walking. Suddenly, at the crossroads of a mule track leading to an abandoned quarry, we were attracted by a glowing red light behind the trees on a hill. We approached it cautiously, and we heard strange noises like those in a science fiction film. Bleep, bleep. Words cannot describe how I felt. Then we saw the outline of a tall figure. It stepped forward and was lit by the moon's rays. It was like an athlete in a luminous suit which clung to the body, and it had on a silver helmet. We were 35 feet away, petrified by what we saw. Then the figure turned to face us, and from the level of its eyes came flashing lights, red and orange. We turned back to the village, scared stiff. Giovanello and Cerello excitedly told their story to 3 men they found in the village square: medical student Antonio Pascucci, schoolteacher Emilio Capabianco, and machinist Arturo de Ambrosio. Our first reaction was to laugh, recalled Pascucci, 24, who attends Naples University. However, out of curiosity, they went to the scene in de Ambrosio's car. The creature was dressed in a silver suit with a belt. Where 2 eyes should be were 2 orange lights which blinked. It had arms and legs, but we could not see if it had normal feet and hands. In the distance down the slope, we could see the outline of an object with portholes and white lights inside of it. There was a dome on top with another light. Pascucci came to the conclusion that the figure defied the laws of gravity as it moved up and down the slope. Its body was always at the right angles to the ground, whereas humans must lean on steep slopes to keep from falling. Pascucci tried to walk in the same way as the figure, but fell over each time. He continued, "With its eyes, it blinked out messages in Morse-like code. We couldn't understand the messages, but the rhythm was a regular pattern, as if it were trying to communicate. Then it tried with high-pitched sounds like radio, again in Morse code form, before changing to a low pitch like an airplane engine." The 5 drove back to Sterno, where they came across singer Mario Sisto and his friend Michelino Rifoli, also out for a late-night stroll. Sisto, 39, and Rifoli, 49, returned to the quarry site with the men, and the giant figure was still there. Sisto said that the humanoid, which had a black box attached to his waist, made a beckoning gesture with its right arm, like an invitation to follow. But Sisto and his friends were too afraid to move, so the humanoid began to move toward them. Then it stopped, pointed toward the sky, and seemed to indicate that he came from up there. To find out whether it was a trick, the men threatened it, saying they had a gun and would shoot if he didn't speak up. But the humanoid made no response. Although scared at the time, the fascination of it all kept the men from running away. Pascucci said that he tried to communicate with the creature using sign language, but had no success. The figure came no closer than 50 feet to them. The men watched the humanoid until about 3:30 a.m. Then, says Pascucci, suddenly a ray of intense white light shot out from its forehead, lighting up the whole area. This time the men were panic-stricken, fearing that the light was a laser beam and that it would shrivel them. The 7 fled back to Sterno. The next morning, villagers flocked up to the site, but by this time the mysterious creature had disappeared. The unidentified craft had also vanished, but in the hard, rocky ground where it had been sighted, 3 circular imprints arranged in a triangle were visible. These strange imprints were examined by construction engineer Carmine Cangiro, but he was unable to offer any explanation for them. 2 sides of the triangle measured about 13 feet, and the base measured about 14 feet, he told the newspaper. The diameter of the circles was about 8 inches. 3 holes inside the circles, also in the form of a triangle, were 1.5 inches deep. By his calculations, he said, it would take an immense force to create the imprints. The only thing I know of which could possibly have made them is a pile driver, but it would be impossible to get one up the mule track. All 7 men were questioned carefully by the police, by a doctor, and by the mayor of Sterno, and all were convinced they were telling the truth. Sterno, Italy, 1977, seems a long way off geographically and chronologically from the events of Genesis 6. But the answer we are seeking is whether there is a linkage between the two. Does the giant seen by men of Sterno and other encounters of the third kind have any relation to the giant Nephilim of pre-deluge times? Heck yes, they do.